Back with you now on the news feed. Here we continue with your reporting. The ANC in Kwazulu-Natal has stood by its decision to support former President Jacob Zuma during his arms deal trial appearance today at the Pietermaritzburg High Court. The ANC in Kwazulu-Natal Secretary General Mdumiseni Ntuli, who was in court today, joins us to be a part of this conversation. Let's get some of your views tonight at Newsroom 405 or your questions and comments on 072-110-558. Ntuli, good evening and thank you very much for your time. First and foremost, it's been a question that many have been asking. I mean, I don't have the exact figures, but from the looks of things, those who are gathered today are way past the lockdown limitations of outside gatherings. Are you at all concerned about COVID-19 restrictions?
Well, thanks. Good evening to you, and also good evening to the viewers at home. Certainly, as a governing party and the responsible leadership of the African National Congress in the province, we were very, very concerned, gravely concerned about the numbers that turn up to support former President Zuma in Pietermaritzburg High Court today, given the fact that as a country and the rest of the continent and the world, we are going through a difficult period of a sustained battle in the fight against the pandemic. But as you know, in the main, people who went to the case had organized themselves and their own transport, and nobody really would have an absolute expectation about how many people would turn out in court today. If you compare today and last week, the numbers are different. So it tells you that these are people who organize themselves and they then take transport to go and attend the case.
As a leader of society, what are you going to do about it?
Well, we're very concerned about it. First and foremost, we had conveyed a very strong message to the membership of the ANC throughout the province about the need to avoid big gatherings, including big numbers attending the court case in an environment where social distancing and all other requirements are not adhered to. But you see, we must continue to engage this population of the ANC membership to educate them about the importance of giving support to one of their own, but equally the responsibility attended to us as a governing party in this country and as a leader of society, the African National Congress, that we've got to restrain ourselves so that we're not going to do things that would put the very same society we claim to represent at the risk or at danger of perishing because of our own negligence.
But the ANC knows what to do, really. That's what I'm saying. And previously, the ANC took a decision, for example, to cancel its birthday celebrations, gatherings, because they know if they mount the event, the supporters will show up. So why are you putting up these events? Because the supporters are going to show up.
We are not putting up an event.
Certainly, it is well organized. I mean, if you put a stage, you put a sound system, you are putting up an event, you're organizing that event to happen.
We are confronted by what we call an inevitability, a situation that is going to occur, whether we decide to plan or not to plan for it. Now, the best way you can handle such circumstances as a responsible leadership is that there must be some mitigating factors that you put in place in order to ensure that that which may not be very known to you or completely unknown to you, but which is likely to happen, when it does happen, you are in a slightly better place with appropriate interventions to mitigate the impact of the situation. So when you put up a sound system on the stage, you are accepting that whether you mobilize or you do not mobilize people, they are still going to come. So what you do, you must then make plans to the extent that it will be possible as part of your mitigating interventions to deal with the reality that you know is going to be facing you when you wake up the next day.
But other parties will look at that in the province. They'll do the same. They'll say, well, people are going to show up, so we're here. We might as well just put a sound system and a stage and let's put other mitigating factors in place. And that's not the law. That's not what the law says. Be that as it may, let us move on because we want to get to the other issues. The other issues that you had raised previously when I was talking to you is the unprincipled stance of busing in people from the Free State to come to the trial in Pietermaritzburg. What did you do about that? Look,
we stand by that position, and the fact that there may be people who arrived today who are coming from outside the province, does not necessarily mean that the position we adopted was incorrect. It only means that there are people who were very determined to do that which we were saying should not be done, which is to come from all over where they were coming from to come and give a support to former President Zuma. Because the reason why we're saying that, we knew right from the beginning that the support that is going to be coming locally in Pietermaritzburg will themselves might be more than the number that is expected in terms of our government regulation. And that's why we're saying it is unacceptable for people to be passed all over the country or elsewhere, somewhere elsewhere outside Pietermaritzburg for those who are going to be making their own means to come to the court case. But the fact that people came does not mean that our position was wrong. We still stand by that position. And the fact that we were not able to convince everybody else that the position we've adopted is correct and all of us must adhere to doesn't make it in any way to be incorrect.
The question arises, is it the position and the view of the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal that if there is no support for the former President Jacob Zuma, there is no unity in the ANC?
No, that is not necessarily our view. Let me tell you what is our view. When we were elected in 2018, one of the things that we embarked on as a provincial executive committee was to conduct a very extensive analysis of the environment we find ourselves, the threat to the movement, and what is it that we are required to do to reposition the province, which has a much more bigger responsibility than any other province because of, one, the size of the ANC membership and the size of the electoral support base of the African National Congress. So we said there is a responsibility attended to those who are the big part of the liberation movement, and we are. So we then said, you know, there is an ongoing case of former President Zuma taking place within our own province. There's a decision of the National Executive Committee. Sure, we support that decision, we stand by it. But we now understand that this decision of the National Executive Committee is taken at a time when, in the past, for over a period of 15 years, other NEC meetings had taken a decision about how to handle the case involving former President Zuma, including, by the way, national general councils as well as national conferences. The second observation we made was that whether the NEC has taken a decision and the correctness of that decision, which we support, but what is our own lived experience? Because it's one thing to take a decision, it's another to then say, what are the lessons that we're learning out of the decision, a correct decision that we have taken? Or how are the conditions on the ground? Is the decision finding expression? If not, what are the threats to your own decision and to your own organization? Well, that's why we went back to the national leadership and said, look, the case against former President Zuma has become an arena of not just the opposition, but people who are diametrically opposed to the ANC and the National Executive Committee of the ANC. So we've got to take a responsibility because this thing is happening in our own province. And it has a potential to confuse the membership of the ANC, which will then be not understanding how come we go to court and get addressed by all of these people who are not comrades and yet we have our own elected leadership. It was on those bases that the NEC agreed with us that in these circumstances, while we must respect the decision of the NEC, but we think that the political condition you find yourselves in requires a peculiar intervention, which we agree with you that you must make that intervention. So it's not about that if JZ is not supported, the ANC will be divided. That would be a very narrow understanding of our position. Our position is informed by the material conditions, but equally, the fact that this is not a news and old case in which the movement has taken several decisions on it.
The ANC's view on the position that the former president is taking, that accepting donations from the arms company was part of the ANC's liberation struggle culture. Do you accept that as a norm? And were you aware of these donations that were being made to the president? And is that something that is acceptable?
Well, we think those matters are still contested in the court of law. And our own view is that we must be very careful not to insert ourselves into a discussion about matters that are still being ventilated in the court of law. Because once you deal with the merits and the demerits of the case, we are inevitably placing ourselves in a position of either being part of the defense team or part of the prosecution team. So our view is that let's allow those developments to unfold in the court of law. And once they are concluded, clearly I'm sure that the National Executive Committee will then apply its own mind about the implication of what has gone on in court and how the ANC should position itself in dealing with it.
But in your own political astuteness, your own political consciousness and awareness, is it ANC's liberation struggle culture to receive donations to support a struggling comrade from arms companies?
Well, I don't know about arms companies, but I know that the ANC as an organization does not generate profits. So it survives on the basis of donations that should be coming from credible companies that are doing business wherever they are doing business, as long as they are making a donation without any political desire to influence the policy direction of the ANC or how it should constitute itself as part of the leadership of the country.
Does that include donations to individuals in the ANC?
I'm talking about the ANC. The donation to the ANC is what I know and understand.
I'm drawing a distinction. I'm saying, does it include donations to individuals in the ANC?
No, I'm talking about the donations. No, I'm talking about the donations that are coming to the ANC, whether they are directly sent to the ANC or individual leaders of the ANC request those donations from the potential donors. As long as the donation is coming to the ANC, then and it's not done in a way that involves some corrupt practices. That's how the ANC survives. The ANC is not an organization that makes money, but it needs money in order to run its own affairs, and that will have to depend on conscious business people who do their work without any corrupt activities and then donate to the African National Congress.
Previously, in our courts around 2005, the courts found that businessman Schabir Sheikh solicited bribes. They used the word bribes on behalf of former President Jacob Zuma, and he was jailed, supposed to be jailed for 15 years and got out on medical parole in 2009. So there is a court finding that says an individual who was a financial advisor solicited particular funding for an individual in the African National Congress, and the former president saying, well, those were donations given to him with no expectation. I'm trying to understand that. Would that be a culture and a part of the ANC's liberation struggle culture?
No, I don't think that is a culture, and I think you are quite correct that former President Zuma responded to that question in terms of how the donation was made. And in your own words, you are saying that the donation was made to him and not to the organization, and that's what he said according to the statement we have made. So how you can then elevate that into a culture of a national liberation movement. It's a transition between individual citizens of this country, one of them who coincidentally happened to be part of the National Liberation Movement leadership. But I don't think that such exceptions must be characterized as a culture of the African National Congress. I think we must see them for what they are rather than elevating them to what they are not.
Mdumiseni Ntuli stays with us. We'll continue next. Go to your WhatsApp messages that are coming through tonight. He is the ANC's Kwazulu-Natal Secretary, Mdumiseni Ntuli. Your views tonight on 072-110-5584. The Newsfeed Late Night continues next. Right, back with you here on the Newsfeed Late Night, and we continue with our conversation with the ANC Kwazulu-Natal Secretary, Mdumiseni Ntuli. We'll get to your WhatsApp messages coming through tonight. Ntuli, you've got 12 of your members affected by the step-aside resolution. You're saying they are stepping down from extra responsibilities, however, they still continue to keep their jobs. How does that work?
Well, yeah, you are quite correct. That is essentially consistent with the position adopted by the National Executive Committee on the guidelines. What the guidelines are saying is that anybody who occupies an executive authority in terms of the deployment, whether you're an MEC, a minister, a speaker, and all of that, portfolio chairperson, portfolio committee chairperson, you've got to resign that responsibility and become an ordinary member of the legislature or an ordinary council. But within that category as well, you are not permitted to address both the legislative body you belong to and anywhere else on behalf of the ANC. But of course, we have a responsibility to attend those sittings. You have a responsibility to attend the portfolio committees. And as and when the chief whip of the relevant legislative body decide that you must participate in terms of voting, that will be determined by the chief whip. Because the reason why the ANC does that is because the ANC says we must insulate the party from any difficulty that we are facing as individuals. But equally, that does not mean we've concluded on your fate that you are guilty as charged. You are currently charged. Insulate the party a little bit from your own difficulties. Don't represent us in public. Don't go around and campaign for the ANC, because people may very well say, but you do not have the credibility and the legitimacy in our eyes in order to persuade us to follow the ANC. But it doesn't mean the ANC says, you are definitely corrupt and we are going to rot in prison. And that is why it leaves a room for you to be able to continue with the little bit of the work that you have to do for your own also survival, in order to continue provide whatever responsibility that you have towards your family and your kids. Yeah. But the ANC must regulate your participation because of the difficulty that you find yourself in.
It leaves a room for a lot of ambiguity. You are legitimate to be contesting positions, but you're not legitimate to be campaigning for the ANC. What is the difference, right? I can campaign to hold a position in the party, but I cannot campaign on behalf of the party.
We've got to clarify that. When the National Executive Committee took a decision that comrades must step aside, the understanding is that you step aside from every responsibility, including that you can't attend any of the meetings of the ANC, even a meeting where you may possibly be considered for election, you can't attend that meeting. What the NEC did not pronounce on was whether or not, during the period when you have stepped aside, are you permitted to be elected? Is it permissible for you to be elected into any of the structures of the ANC? That's a matter that we've agreed as a province that, to the extent that it is implied on the guideline, because when it says you can't represent the ANC, you can't occupy a position of leadership, it effectively, in a way, suggests that even if you are to be elected to any structure today, the following day, that election will be an academic exercise because you can't go out and represent the organization. But the National Executive Committee has not effectively addressed that question in that way. And that's a matter that our view as a province is that we must allow the National Working Committee and the National Executive Committee to exercise its mind about the implication of the decision that has been taken in the context of comrades who are now being considered for leadership by various structures of the ANC. But at this stage, you can't say to them, you don't qualify.
So at this stage, what you're saying is that it's the position of the province that you can be elected into office. It's not the final position taken by the National Executive Committee.
No, it's not the position of the province that you can be elected. It's the position that was communicated by the National Executive Committee that everybody must step aside. But what the NEC has not yet articulated with some specific references is whether or not, during the period when you stepped aside, you are permitted to be considered for being elected into the position of leadership. What we discussed as a PEC was that, now, even if a comrade is considered to be available for being elected into a position of leadership, but it effectively means you may be elected today in your absentia, because in the ANC you can be elected without being in that conference. Can be elected in your absentia, but you can't even come in and close that conference, let alone to occupy the office the next day. And that is why we said that grey area requires a bit of a guidance that must come from the national leadership of our movement.
Now, yesterday during the press conference, you, of course, were asked the question, does everybody accept this position, the step-aside resolution, and they are willing to abide by it? Your answer was that, yes, everybody is affected by it, does accept. Of course, a bit later on, some contradictory reporting emerged that some of those who are affected actually do not agree with that. What's the position currently? Is everybody in agreement?
Well, I saw that headline, which was actually making references to Comrade Zandile Gumede, I believe that headline was really ill-informed. It was communicating a narrative that is really grounded on fiction. Let me give you a practical example. I had a meeting with Comrade Zandile yesterday in the morning, just before I went to the press briefing in the afternoon, explaining to her the implication of stepping aside, to her as a member of the legislature, and to her as well as a member of the interim leadership structure of the ANC. When we left that meeting, the interim leadership structure of eThekwini was due to hold their own meeting and later on meet with branches of the ANC. We departed that meeting, the two of us understanding that, therefore, now that she has met with me and I've explained the implication of the ANC decision, she is no longer going to be attending a meeting of the National Trust Team as well as the meeting of branches later in the afternoon. And she duly sent an apology to the regional coordinator to the effect that following an engagement with myself, it is no longer going to be permissible for her to attend the meeting. Now, late in the evening, a strange headline emerges from one newspaper and is purporting to have quoted Comrade Zandile saying that she doesn't agree with the decision of the National Executive Committee. I don't believe that. I did not even bother to follow up with her because she hasn't done anything that is contrary to the position I conveyed to her yesterday, except what the headline had said. And we don't respond to all headlines because some of them are not grounded on facts and they are not informed by the actuality of the situation that we're dealing with.
All right, let's take some of the WhatsApp messages and comments coming through tonight. The one from Nkosinathi Shabalala saying, I want to know what changed the minds and the resolution of the ANC KZN PEC that said we must not support Zuma a few years ago, and now they're encouraging us to support him against the national resolution that has forced others to step aside. I think you have articulated that in your previous answer, but give us once again, for the benefit of Nkosinathi, a short summary.
There hasn't been any change, Nkosinathi. The principal position adopted by the PEC has remained consistent from the day it was adopted until today. You know, we take decisions as an organization based on principle. But there's an understanding in the ANC. That's why we sometimes refer to what is called dialectical materialism. That you may be correct and take a correct political principled position, but at times the material conditions on the ground will dictate how you respond to the implementation of your own principle. And that's what motivated the NEC to accept that we are confronted by a unique situation which requires the application of principle with justifiable flexibility. And that's what we're doing. And this is only about an old case that is almost 20 years that involves Comrade JZ. It has nothing to do with all other cases going on in the province.
So in eThekwini, saying how many delegates are supposed to be elected by each branch to the regional conference as per ANC guidelines document, and which rule supports your answer, which I can refer to?
The ANC branches are electing about 5 to 10 delegates because we ordinarily, most of our regions will have a regional conference that is attended by about 500 people. But under the current situation that we find ourselves in, we said to them, elect a maximum of delegates as we used to do, but we will assess by the time we get to your regional conference whether it is possible and permissible in terms of the regulations of COVID-19 for us to convene a regional conference that is above a minimum of 200, which is currently a determination by our national government.
This one from Lehumo Francis Malema saying the politics of the ANC are quite intriguing. On the one side, the events are a true test of our democracy, whilst on the other hand, they are a crazy demonstration. You have comrades siding with RET and CR21 on the other fence. Some are quiet, some are quite contradictory. Are you flip-flopping, Ntuli, between the two sides?
No, we are not. You see, there is a decision of the National Conference of the ANC that says at the heart of our strategy in the current phase of the National Democratic Revolution is economic emancipation of our people. And that was then characterized as radical socio-economic transformation, which is an agenda that we share, all of us who are members of the ANC. Yeah. You then have a group of comrades who unfortunately have appropriated to themselves the term and the concept of what is called RET. And the way that at times they posture and position themselves is very contrary to what the intended agenda of what we call radical economic transformation. So we're not flip-flopping. We have to deal with the exception, because some of those people, some of them, I don't even know them in the ANC. There's one who called himself, he's a national coordinator of RET. When you ask him in simple terms, what do you mean by that? What is your, how will a South Africa that has realized a radical socio-economic transformation look like? He has no clue. The man gets lost. He doesn't know, because he uses this as a slogan to rally a particular agenda and a particular faction within the ANC. And we've got to separate that, because if we don't do that, tomorrow we may have some people also calling themselves expropriation of land without compensation forces. And you can't do that. You cannot take appropriate conference resolutions of the ANC to a particular In fact, to do so, we must reject that, because it then denigrates the resolutions of conference. It makes them to appear like they are something else other than what they seek to do, which is the emancipation of our people economically. That is part of the current phase of the NDI.
Mdumiseni Ntuli, I appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us tonight, ANC Kwazulu-Natal Secretary, and thank you for your engagement tonight on the Newsfeed.